Dear Father, thank you for these brothers and sisters of mine. I pray that they would be able to take what is of you and apply it to their classrooms so that students may feel more loved and heard, and that your glory may be raised up. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. Okay, my name is Ted Turnau. I am Chair of Arts, Culture, and Literature at Anglo-American University in Prague, Czech Republic, where I teach not arts, culture, and literature. I teach cultural studies, media studies, religious studies, and a little bit of social theory. I am going to talk about the spiritual impact of popular culture and focusing upon... Come on in, Claire.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to mention... Or that was something else? Anyway, no, that was another conference I'm doing. Anyway, where was I? Derailed my train of thought. So today we're going to look at popular culture, especially where it is most keenly felt. Oops, don't squish anybody in the door. Especially where it is most keenly felt, that is when a person finds such joy in a piece of popular culture that they form a bond with it. This is known as fandom, and that's where things get really interesting, in my opinion. So here's what we're going to do. In the following in the footsteps of Christian and his brilliant talk, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. Metalinguistic markers to help you through. I'm going to introduce my own study of fandom, the Fandom and Spirituality Project. Then we're going to get into defining fandom. What is a fan? What is fandom? And then we're going to ask a question that I've been thinking about for quite some time. Can fandom be thought of as a functional religion? And then third, okay, knowing what we know, how do we as teachers respond to this information? I'm going to suggest that the proper way to respond to fans in our class is to love them, okay? Shouldn't be a stretch for us Christians, but it means a lot. Is there somebody lurking? Do we have a lurker? Lurkers. Okay, you're fine, okay. But before I do that, I do need to explain my t-shirt. When Bethany told me that I should come and talk, and I was like, well, how should I dress? Is there a dress code? And she said, well, dress the way that you teach, what you wear where you teach. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what I wear when I teach. I'm a university lecturer. I dress down so that I am more on the level of my students, which might be a disaster in Germany. In the Czech Republic, where professors are like the authority, this is a kind of a subversive statement saying, I am sort of one of you. I'm also definitely, come on in, I'm definitely an authority over you, as you see when you receive grades and things like that. And I know stuff that maybe you don't know, but I do want to establish a rapport with my students. But I rarely wear this t-shirt. You guys are all very fortunate. For those of you listening at home, I am wearing the most awesome Godzilla t-shirt. And this is the awesomest shirt that I own and one of the most precious objects that I own. I bought this for $35 in 2013 at a fan convention, which was a lot of money for a t-shirt back then. And I have looked for this t-shirt on eBay, and the last time I saw it, I haven't seen it for a while, it was worth $130. So it is limited edition. And when I was at a more recent fan convention, there was this guy who was lecturing on Godzilla, and he stopped me in the hall, and he was in full cosplay. Like, he had Godzilla cosplay. He had a helper helping him maneuver the tail, and he had the blue spikes and everything. And he stopped me after he'd given this brilliant lecture, and he said, I have that t-shirt. That's a good shirt. And I was like, yes, it is. So all of this is to say, when I'm talking about fans, when I'm talking about geeks and nerds, I am one of the nerd herd. I am talking about my own tribe. Okay? So, I have been thinking about fandom for a long time. I started formally thinking about fandom in 2009 when I started teaching a class at Anglo-American University called Understanding Media Fandom. And we would look at the different phases of fan theory and fan studies. And at the end of the class, there's a unit called Fandom and Religion, because fandom shares a lot of the same vocabulary as religion. You know, they're like Tom Waits' God and conversion stories and things like that. And so it seems obvious to me, but it's a big debate because some of these fan scholars were raised in a religious home and they rejected that, and they're like, no, this is nothing like, no, brr. And I weigh both sides of the argument, and I come down on the, yeah, it really kind of is. And I said, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to get into the fray. But then there was this voice in my head that whispered ever so gently, you know, shouldn't you actually talk to fans before you presume to tell them what they believe? Like, wouldn't it be a good idea to actually do some research? And I was like, dang. So I went to my first fan convention, Dragon Con, 2013 in Atlanta, Georgia. You may not have ever heard of it. It is huge. 50,000 nerds converge on a number of hotels in downtown Atlanta. It is amazing and bewildering, and they're fans of everything from detective novels to Star Wars to sci-fi to vampires to horror to anime to everything, and they put them all in different hotels so they don't fight.
Why do they call it Dragon Con?
Because it was originally fantasy sci-fi. It started off as a fantasy sci-fi, and I actually heard some gatekeeping there. For those of you who don't know, gatekeeping is like, you're not a real fan. It's like throwing up barriers. And there were people who were like, why don't you anime fans go to the anime fandom? I'm like, this is Dragon Con, man. You do everything. So be quiet. So I, being a fan of Joss Whedon properties, namely Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Firefly, absolutely, Browncoats Forever, and beginnings of the MCU, those first couple of movies that he did. And there are a couple of other minor properties. I was really into Joss Whedon, so I went to the Whedonverse track. And in the Whedonverse track, there was a panel discussion with like 5 to 7 fans, all female, and they were talking, and the panel, the discussion topic was life, death, and resurrection in the Whedonverse. Because Joss Whedon has the reputation of killing off beloved characters so that the stakes seem real, seem high, and then sometimes he has to bring them back. And so it was this big, and you had these women quoting season and episode of various programs like Christians would quote chapter and verse from the Bible. And I was listening, very rapt. It was really fascinating. And then this one woman, her name was Melissa. She had these big glasses, kind of frizzy brown hair, and kind of looked like middle-aged mom type. And she said, and I quote, "I would not be alive today if it were not for Buffy season 6. And I went, what? What? This is a woman I need to interview. I really need to talk to her. And so I came up to her and said, hey, can we schedule a time to talk? And we did. Now here's what you need to know. How many people have seen Buffy or know anything about Buffy? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 6. Okay, for those of you who don't know, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is all about this teenage cheerleader at an American high school in California named Buffy Summers, who one day, a guy comes up to her and says, "You are the chosen one. You are the one to save the world from the demons and vampires and evil things that want to take it over." And it turns out that her town is on a hellmouth where demons kind of exit. And so her job is to be a guardian, and she's given super strength and all of these sort of skills. And that's her job. And the show was originally supposed to run 5 years. And at the end of the end of the season 5, Buffy gives her life. There's this energy portal that opens up, and she dives in cruciform backward, so you can see her like this. No Christ symbolism there, and gives her life and dies to close this portal so that the world is saved. I'm sorry, that's a huge spoiler, but it was like late 90s, early 2000s. So you guys, you have no one but yourself to blame. And then she's dead. And end of season. Except the CW, another cable channel in the U.S., said, "No, we want to run Buffy," and they contracted with Joss. And so Joss had to bring her back from the dead. And the way he did it was the first episode of season 1 is Buffy's friends who have sort of taken on the... I'm sorry, season 6. Did I say season 1? Season 6. Sorry, I'm mentally disabled. So season 6, episode 1, is Buffy's friends who've taken on the job of fighting the demons and the vampires are finding themselves wildly outmatched. They don't have her super strength. And they're just like, "We can't do this without Buffy." And one of them knows a dark ritual to bring back the dead. And so around her tombstone, they do this dark ritual, and it seems like it just doesn't work. And they go home. Unbeknownst to them, Buffy, it actually worked, and Buffy finds herself buried alive in her coffin. And so she has to use her super strength to bust out of the coffin and claw her way to the surface, which leaves her traumatized, because what they don't know is they dragged her down from heaven. They thought she was in hell and they were doing her a favor. She was in heaven as the chosen one, and she spends the rest of season 6 severely depressed and dealing with her depression in all sorts of unhealthy ways. I'm not... calm down. No spuffy in this. Wow, we've got a fan. So she deals with it in all sorts of unhealthy ways. And that is exactly what Melissa needed at that time in order to keep her alive. And I interviewed her, and she said this. That is Buffy, meets a lot of needs. Buffy's what I turned to. 12 years ago, postpartum depression. So she's like 19, military wife, her husband's out at sea, and she's giving birth, and she falls into this deep postpartum depression. 12 years ago, postpartum depression, season 6 was airing, and I don't think I'd have gotten through without Buffy. Buffy's what I turn to. When I'm upset, I watch Buffy. When I need something to encourage me, I watch Buffy. It's almost like a religion. The way people turn to their religious text, I turn to Buffy. And then I said, because if she can do it, you can do it? And Melissa responded, a sense of hope? Yeah. If she can do it, I can do it. And I said, even though you know it's fictional, it all just comes from Joss's mind. And she responded, yeah, I know all that. It just speaks to me. It's hard to explain. Like that, I think, is real evidence that this is working for her, in her, like a religion would. So that kicked off that interview, and some others I did that weekend, kicked off a project called the Fandom and Spirituality Project, which ran for 13 years. I didn't work on it consistently, off and on, but what I did is I did 28 interviews at 4 separate fan conventions. By the way, this is not me. My cosplay game is not this strong. I have cosplayed, but it's never been really good. So I did DragonCon 2013, DragonCon 2015, Anime Mid-Atlantic 2018, and GalaxyCon Raleigh 2025. I also did 2 online surveys that one running from 2013 to 2018. I got about 107 good responses, and the other one was 2024 to 2025, and I bugged a lot of my students, and I got 105 responses. 3 people answered twice, but they were years apart, so I counted them as separate responses. And all in all, I got 243 responses where I asked questions about what's your spiritual background, what are you practicing now, what's your commitment to fandom, how does fandom act in your life, how do you think about how your spiritual life and your fandom life connect with one another or doesn't connect with one another. And then I took all of those attitudes, made codes of them, little abbreviations, plotted them all out on several Excel sheets, and then started looking for patterns. Had a friend help me, ended up being AI. I didn't know that, but AI is really helpful in finding patterns like that. And it was really interesting, fascinating. I've written a book on it that I'm still editing to make it more readable, and I hope to get that published in the next year or 2. So that's my background in all this. Let's talk about what fandom is. There are many definitions and opinions about what fandom is. For me, my own definition, which comes from my study, is that fandom represents or describes a relationship between a fan, a person, and a fan object, a piece of popular culture, a performing group, a game series, or whatever. And this relationship is characterized by delight and affection. By the way, if you want an outline, there is one on your WhatsApp thing, if you need it. I had some hard copies, but the first group all snarfed them up. So delight and affection. The fan object provokes deep pleasure. It resonates with the fan really, really hard, so much so that the fan embraces it. And by embracing it, I mean they have a passionate, emotional, imaginative response to the fan object that leaves them longing for more. They want more. And they want to talk about it, and they want to live there somehow. That delight and affection comes from the fact that this fan object is super significant. It holds a deep meaning for them. It resonates with them in a certain way, and they respond to that resonance by investing in the fandom. And by investing, of course, I mean money, $35, and it was not the only. I have like 12 Godzilla t-shirts at home. And a special limited edition Godzilla jacket, which will never see the light of day except for like once a year. And but also in terms of emotional energy, intelligence and figuring out plot lines and stuff like that, in terms of imagination, in terms of creativity. It's also characterized by attention and care. Because the fan object is significant to the fan knows it in more than usual detail. Like Claire knew something about a certain character and Buffy that was kind of sketchy.
Yeah, but I can't quote seasons or episodes. I'm not that crazy.
Okay. All right, so there is a hierarchy. And I would say, as the guy wearing the Godzilla t-shirt, I would lay money on the fact that I know more about Godzilla than just about anybody else at this conference.
I'm sure you're gonna win.
If anyone wants to come and challenge me, I'm throwing down the gauntlet. But see, that's one of my fandoms. That is where I know stuff. I've even been to the Godzilla theme park in Japan in Awaji Island and got into a conversation with a 14-year-old girl on the spectrum about which Godzilla movie was the best. I was like, this is awesome. So they memorize, they create stuff, they memorize lyrics, they memorize plot lines, they memorize episodes.
Like fan fiction?
Like fanfic. Some of them get tattoos, some of them get goofy t-shirts. There's just a whole video editing, all sorts of stuff. And because of that resonance, there is a sense of ownership. This is my thing. This is the thing that I'm about. And it interacts with their identity, expresses their identity. It reflects something about them, right? I've been watching Godzilla movies since I was this high. And do not take the G-Man from me. I will, it's my thing. That's my thing. And sometimes, because of that ownership and identity, an attachment forms, a deep attachment, which can kind of spill over into a sense of dependence. Life would be boring, dull, gray, commonplace, without this special thing that makes life worth living. And even the way that I just phrased it, well, we'll get to that later. There is also, for some fans, they get into the community, that fandom is communal, that there's a debate in fan studies about whether, some fan theorists and some fans say it's not real fandom unless you're into the community. My research did not show that. There are some fans who are deeply invested but who are happy to remain alone. But for really hardcore fans, they go to the cons or they go form clubs or they just share it with a loved one or with family or friends, and these relationships, whether they're online or offline, can last decades. It's kind of fan church. And finally, for the highly invested fans who feels that attachment and dependence, there is often a note of sacredness or devotion. That there's something about the fan object that sets it apart. Yes?
Can you ask questions right now or after your presentation?
Go ahead right now.
Okay, can we relate this to the searching for your tribe, the same with
Absolutely.
like with sports fan and music fan?
Yep. So let me give you a concrete example. When we went to the first Dragon Con convention, my youngest daughter was going through kind of a dark period in her life. She was struggling with depression and stuff like that. And she had cosplayed as Princess Mononoke from the Studio Ghibli film, Mononoke Hime. She was dressed up as the wolf princess. And she wasn't really into it. We were staying in a little hotel outside of Atlanta because all the Atlanta hotels were booked. And it was a really good costume. And we got on to the MARTA, the rapid transit, and we start going towards downtown Atlanta. And as we're going, more and more costumed fans are getting on the metro and on the subway or the underground for you British people. And she's like looking around like, wait, weird people. Like, I'm weird people. And then we walk into the Peachtree Center, and you could see her shoulders relax. She's like, "My people, I found you." I mean, it was beautiful. It was hilarious at the same time. And she's like, and for the rest of that weekend, she had a blast. She was like, "Oh my gosh, I found my tribe." There was a guy who won the cosplay competition. This was before furries were a thing, people. He was like a full dressed, like this is August in Georgia, and he's dressed up in all of this fake fur, full wolf head to toe, and she's the wolf princess, and whenever they're passing in the hallway, they're like, "Hey," and they have the picture together. It was just so sweet. So sweet. So yes, exactly. Exactly that. That is one important aspect of fandom.
But Ted, does everybody know the origin of the word fan? It's not a fan.
No. Does everybody? Okay.
Where does the word come from? I know.
No, you don't. You don't know. It comes from two separate.
Marianne's right.
No. She's half right. It comes from two roots that kind of converge in late 19th century. One is fancy, which comes from British boxing.
Fancier.
Yeah. Like there was boxing fanciers, and that was shortened to fance, and that was shortened again to fan, and that was Britain. And then there was in America in baseball, right around the same time, there was a name for really loud, obnoxious people, sports observers in the stands called fanatics,
Yes.
which comes from the Latin fanaticus, which has to do with people who dwell too close to the fanum, the altar, and they get a little crazy, right? And those two come together. The far more obvious one for us today, and probably the more important one for a connection between fandom and religion, is the fanatic
'cause you can
etymology.
call people religious fanatics.
Right, exactly. Okay, I'm a fan of Jesus. That is something I'm going to talk about in the book. Is there a difference between a Christian and a Jesus fan? Because I have read some fan theorists saying, you guys are all about talking about fandom in terms of religion. What about religion in terms of fandom? But that's not something I'm going to talk about right now. Something I'm talking about in the book. Fandom has been around for a very long time. As long as people have been telling stories, other people have been saying, I really like that character. I want to tell more stories about that. So, for example, the oldest literary work in the world is the Epic of Gilgamesh, about a warrior tyrant king who goes on a search for immortality, yada, yada, yada. I'm not going to tell Gilgamesh, but like hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 years after the Gilgamesh epic was written, you get other Gilgamesh stories, the continuing adventures of, like this is the first fan fiction that was written. Similarly, you have the Gnostic Gospels, written 100, 200 years after Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which fill in the gaps about what we don't know about Jesus. It's not real. Jesus, we don't know anything about Jesus' boyhood except for this one story about boy Jesus at the temple. But, the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas said, yeah, he was hanging out and he was making these mud birds, and then he'd breathe on them and they'd fly away, and then his friends were mean to him and he'd zap them and teach them to behave, and and it's like, it's just okay, like that's fan fiction. It's not canon, it's fan fiction. Or King Arthur, 14th century England, Sir Thomas Malory, all that good stuff. In its day, King Arthur was bigger than Batman in terms of fan recognition. Okay, so second question. Can fandom be thought of as a functional religion? And the answer is it depends. Kind of yes, kind of no, depending on two things. Number one, on your definition of religion. And I also work in religious studies, and there's quite a debate. There's a lot of debate about how you define religion, and on the specific fan, because fandom is a spectrum, what I call from casual to kamikaze, from the most, this is fun, to I am all in, this is everything to me, and everything in between. So, about the definition of religion. Religion can be roughly defined in two ways. Number one is you define religion as worship of supernatural beings or some sort of transcendent spiritual system. And if you define religion that way, fandom is not a religion mostly. There's a few exceptions. For example, there really is a Church of the Jedi. There really are people who gather around and are inspired by the teachings of Master Yoda. And they practice lightsaber meditation and all of this sort of stuff. There's a thing. They know they can't lift rocks, but they say these are the principles we want to live by. And these things down here, these are the Valar from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Silmarillion. And some people think that these represent actual divine beings. And they pray to them and they worship them. That is not a majority. It's fairly rare, but it does happen. But if you define religion not by this kind of worship system, but what it does and how it functions for people, that is, it gives them hope and it gives them meaning and a life orientation and a community and something to get out of bed in the morning, then I would say, yes, sometimes, more often than you think, it does function as a religion. But the second thing we talked about is it depends on the specific fan, because fandom is a spectrum from casual to kamikaze. For some who are truly invested, fandom takes on this spiritual intensity. It's not just fun. It's not just fun and entertainment. It's a guide for life. It is a source of hope. There was a guy who responded to an online survey, said, "Everything I have, I got from fandom," and it was like you could have stood him up in a church and he'd give his testimony. Like, it was that intense. He was the one fan that was a folk singer, and that's like fan folk songs. It's a dying art, and I think probably this guy was old when he filled out the survey. It's dead, but it's there are plenty of that. Let me give you another example real quick. There was a guy I interviewed. I think it was at the Anime Mid-Atlantic in 2018. He was a young he was 25, 26. A Blasian, black Asian, that was his word, not my word. Half of his family was black and raised him Christian. Half of his family was Asian and raised him Buddhist. So he was a kind of a Buddhism, Christism. And his grandmother taught him about the tenets of Buddhism, especially balance, by Star Wars, using Star Wars as illustrations of Buddhist principles. And he was had multiple instances of cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma, leukemia, and therefore he was never strong enough to get into martial arts like he wanted to, because that's kind of a Buddhist Asian thing to do. Instead, he used lightsaber training as a sort of a meditative practice. And he took his life direction and his guidance from what is called the Grey Jedi, or the Bendu, who are sort of occupy a territory. If you don't know Star Wars, this is going to make no sense. But there's a light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force, and the Bendu try to encompass both. They try to find a balance between the light and the dark side. So they don't want to be Jedi. They don't want to be evil like the Sith. They want to be somewhere in the middle and find the balance. He also shaped his ethics on a comic book character named Red Hood, who was at one time a sidekick. He was one of the Robins of Batman and Robin, and who left Batman and became Red Hood, who was this character who would do the harsh, morally suspect things that needed to be done, but nobody who was really good wanted to do them. But they had to be accomplished. And he was like, yes, that's me. That's where I take my cue from. And he took his cue from the Assassin's Creed video games. So I think you look at somebody like that, and you have to say, that is a syncretistic belief system. It's an amalgam of different belief systems that is definitely influenced by fandom. Fandom acts as one of those religious beliefs that has informed him and shapes him to this day. Now, not every fan I talked to, most fans I talked to, were not that invested that they were actually making a life system out of it. For many, it's just fun, and it doesn't have a real deep personal significance. For some, fandom gave them careers. There was a Christian fan I talked to who said, "I want to be a doctor because of this anime I watched when I was a little girl." I'm like, okay, why? Like, that's not what I expect when I watch anime, that you become a pre-med student, but okay. Some of them used it to give relief for anxiety or insomnia. Some used it to heal past scars and traumas that they had. So some of them, it had very little spiritual significance. Some of them, it had every spiritual significance, and you had everything in between. That's what I found in my research. So, which is why I couldn't come up with, these are archetypes of fandom. It's just a whole bunch of individuals. But even for those who weren't so heavily invested, fandom still has a pull, a spiritual pull. Why? Well, because fandom offers so much to fans. Fandom offers a community and friends for people who get into the community. And those, like I said, those friendships last decades often. Fandom gives inspiration for costume making and art and video editing and songs and all sorts of things. And most of all, fandom gives the fan an imaginary world that is often better than the world that exists. That it gives them a world to explore in their imagination that is better than the real world, which is often dark and filled with lying politicians and countries that go to war over the dumbest things, and just all of this static. And they're like, nope, I'm out. I'll be in my room playing my computer game. I'll be in my room reading my novel series. I am absolutely fine with checking out of reality for a little bit because I need it for my sanity. All right. So when you have fans in your classroom, and I guarantee that you have some, unless you have the most boring student body just filled with flatlining normies all the way through, I can guarantee you have some people who are kind of invested in fandom. So when you find a student or friend who is deeply invested in fandom, you have a choice. You have three options. Number one, you can reject them and say, that's stupid, that's silly, grow up, live in reality, yada, yada, yada. And if you do that, what you're actually communicating to this person is, this thing that you care deeply about, I think is trash. And when you say that, you are basically saying, I think you are trash. And this is not the way to get students to open up and have a genuine conversation. Okay, so you could reject them. You could also just remain blissfully oblivious, ignorant of them. Just kind of bury your head in the sand and pretend it's not there. I would dare say that this is the most most common option among teachers, is they just don't get it. They don't care to get it. They just let it pass by, which, okay, it's weird, but if you do that, then also you are communicating something to students that you just, the student will not feel any reason to open up to you whatsoever. It's not that you reject them, but that thing that you think is most precious, I'm just not going to learn about. Or you can choose to love them, which means caring enough to enter their world and check it out. And yes, it's time-consuming, and it's weird, and it can be uncomfortable, but it means watching the show or the anime. It means playing the computer game. It means listening to that recording artist. It means watching the sports team. It means reading a novel or whatever, because this is the way Jesus loved us. He did not love us from afar. He entered into our world and came close to us. That's what love does. Love is incarnational. It does not say, you there, you come here, and then maybe we'll have a relationship. It goes into where they are. It enters their world. In this case, you are entering the imagination and passion of your student who is a fan. And that, when you love this way, when you love incarnationally, you enter into a territory. It opens up a landscape where you can ask the question, why? Not, why are you into that? That's weird. Ew. But rather, I see that you're super into this, and I kind of get it, but can you explain to me what sort of, how to get its hooks in you? Like, what is it that resonates with you? But you don't get there right away. You need to spend time there because you need to build relational credibility. You need some street cred. You need to build trust in the student that they're not going to be throwing pearls before swine. They need to be able to trust you where they're most vulnerable. And you need an intellectual understanding of what the fandom is about and how it works. What is this imaginary world about? Once you've done that, however, you can get into all sorts of really cool conversations, mostly outside the classroom, but also even in the classroom, because you will come across as somebody who actually knows something about fandom and not a clueless adult. You're like, oh, this person gets it. This person gets me. So, I understand that you are not all nerds, and I respect that. Fandom is not for everybody, and I get that. There was one guy who ministers in fandom space and says, I would not say that every Christian should be here, because some of them, it's going to be too weird. But everybody should be able to understand a fan's passion and know a little bit about it, even if you're not a nerd yourself. The key ingredient for if you want to get to a place where you share your faith with a fan is our faith and worldview robust enough, good enough, and beautiful enough to present as something worthy of investment more than fandom? Does it have that kind of depth and beauty? Is it really the pearl of great price for you? That is your vision of God's grace big enough to see signs of his grace even within the fandom? This is what we call common grace, general revelation, which is what I'm going to talk about more tomorrow. Can you see signs that point beyond themselves to God, to God's story? Or is your faith simply a wish to have your students behave, to behave in a way that you think is Christian, in a way that makes you feel secure and comfortable, that you are now moral guardian of the land, and you're shaking your finger at everybody who does not believe the way you do? I think that is a much diminished view of the gospel, born more of fear than of faith. And I think in too many times it gets in the way of people even hearing the gospel. I talked to so many ex-Christians who are now into fandom. I was doing all of my interviews in the Southeast, so everybody's ex-Southern Baptist. And I talked to people who left the faith because pastors would not answer their questions, could not answer their questions in a way that was credible. They preached a faith that to this fan felt not about curiosity, not about exploring, not about opening things, but closing things down, locking things down, constraining, controlling, condemning, especially condemning of people who are fans because you're not culturally conforming to what Christians expect of you. You're just being weird. And for a lot of them, like, fine, I'm out. I prefer this church over this church. And that's our fault as a Christian community. When that's on us. We need a deep enough understanding of the gospel and of Christian theology so that we can engage imaginatively with our own faith to understand it so that in wide enough terms so that we can invite people in to a better story where they will find healing and restoration and wholeness. We need to learn to see the faith anew for these fans so that they can come into some place that's good, that's deeply good, and that they can see as good. Let me mention a couple of resources really quickly. What I think is needed at this point in time with regard to fans is, number one, a creative and culturally engaged apologetic. And that is something that I wrote about back in 2012 in a book called Apologetics. You can read, I hate doing a book plug in my own thing, but, it's the best thing I know out there. You can get it on Amazon. You can, if you're not sure about it or me, you can read an excerpt. I have a website called tedturnau.com, and you can download an excerpt. I think it's like the intro in chapter 1 or something like that. And we need Christian creatives to get involved in the wider arts world, entertainment world, so that we can be creating not works of art for the church, not worship songs. We have enough of that. I mean, we have really talented people writing worship songs. What we need are talented Christians who can write for the outside world using themes that open up non-Christian imagination so that they create this space where a Christian and a non-Christian can have a conversation. Not something that's going to shove the gospel down their throat so that people go, I can't deal with that. But something that just kind of coaxes them and say, hey, check this thing out. Isn't this curious? Look at that. That's a rabbit hole. You want to jump down there with me and talk about this thing? That's what I call opening up an oasis. Oases are breathable spaces. Not a bubble, but an oasis. And we don't have enough Christians doing that. So you people in Christian schools, when you find a student who is really adept at storytelling, really adept at photography, really adept at painting, really adept at video editing, or whatever, encourage that person. Get them, make recommendations, get them into an art school, whatever you need to do, because the church has done a really good job of hamstringing itself culturally by saying, a real Christian wouldn't go work in Hollywood. A real Christian wouldn't go work in Manchester. Sorry, Liverpool, but that's where a real Christian wouldn't go work in Berlin. No, a real Christian would go to seminary and become a pastor. So we've done a really good job of evacuating the culture of Christian content, of things that could actually capture hearts. And I wrote about that too. This is Oasis of Imagination is a really big book that gets into everything, like what is the imagination from a biblical perspective, cognitive science, blah, 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 blah. Here's some examples of things I think do well. It's 440 pages or something like that. That may be too big of a commitment unless you're a nerd like me and you really get into the details. Then that's the book for you. The IVP UK had me write a smaller book along with a practicing artist named Ruth Naomi Floyd, who is wonderfully wise. She's a jazz vocalist, composer, art photographer, social activist, and a dear, dear sister. Like, she's family to us. So if you want a capsule version, this is like 120 pages. Let me give you a couple of other resources and then some questions. If you are in Europe and you want to go to a gathering of Christian creatives, storytellers, songwriters, visual artists, go to Hutchmoot. It's from May 6th through 9th next year. We just went to Hutchmoot earlier this month. It's amazing. I spoke there once. My talk went a little long, and and I have not spoken there since. Yes?
That's the dates of next year's EurECA conference. They can't go.
Oh, I'm
Well,
sorry.
the UK, they're at the same time, the US one and the UK one?
No, the U.S. one is different. The U.S. one's in Nashville. I don't know when it is, but it's really worth going to, or sending people who are creatives that need a community.
We'll go in 2028.
Okay, there you go. Morphe Arts does the same thing. I don't think they have a big conference, but if you want to hook into some resources for budding artists, they're the people to go to. I interviewed them for the big book, and they're awesome people. With regard to Fandom, Fans for Christ, this is an amazing ministry. If I were in the States and not doing what I'm doing in Prague, I would totally be into Fans for Christ. They go to cons, they just hang out, they're good convention citizens, and they end up getting into good conversations. They have church services when the con runs into a Sunday. Same deal with Faith and Fandom or Geek Church. Hector Mirai, who this little bearded figure is supposed to be, he and this group write a series of devotionals, each based on a fan object, which is amazing. You can go to Amazon and buy it if you wish, or you can get it for free by just going to their website. Love Thy Nerd, I don't know as much about, but it's also a great ministry. Lots of things about how to think through fan topics from a Christian perspective.
You get notes of this, right? You've got
This is all on the notes package, yeah. Beneath the Tangles, which is an anime-centric fan thing that, like, here's what's going on in anime circles. Here's the episode of this fandom of this anime that everybody loves, and here's where we see Christ reflected in it. Game Church, which is video gamers. It's also tabletop games like Dungeons and Dragons or other RPG games, which you can tell if you're savvy enough by looking at the shape of Jesus. It's a 20-sided die. Yes.
So have they changed the rules of Dungeons and Dragons to apply to Christianity, or they're just playing Dungeons and Dragons in a wild place?
They're playing Dungeons and Dragons, I think mostly 5e, 5th edition. But we had this discussion the first time. It is not demonic. It is not demon-possessed. It is a piece of fiction, and it depends entirely on the guidance of the dungeon master, of the game master. And it can lead in very non-Christian directions. It can lead in very Christian directions. My son, we helped found I'm going to just address this now because it's going to be the elephant in the room. My wife and I helped found a Christian school in Prague in 2004, and my son was one of the first students. And when he got to be 11th or 12th grade, he started a dungeon campaign, a D&D campaign, as an after-school activity, and people came, and one of the teachers came to it, a guy named Wunderlink, Calvin Wunderlink, who is the physics, math teacher at the school. And he was like, oh, this is really cool. And then Roger graduated, and he started DMing, and he learned the game. And he has all of these students, Christians and non-Christians, dealing with ethical concerns and where do you find your hope and stuff like that. And he was like, you get to talk about so many great things during a D&D game. And on the other hand, I'm watching a D&D campaign through YouTube by one of the most talented dungeon masters of our generation, a guy named Brandon, I forget his last name. Brandon, no, that's not it. Dropout. Brandon. Brandon Lee Mulligan. He is so smart, does all of these characters, and he is firmly convinced that religion is a bunch of hooey we construct according to our needs, and therefore religion is like silly putty that you make into anything you can. And he runs his campaigns in that way. And it has a very spiritually deleterious effect on those playing. Super entertaining to watch. And maybe next year when I'm going to ask to go visit the 12th grade apologetics class at this Christian school and run a clip and say, okay, how do you answer that from a Christian perspective? It's good. It's just so good and so not good at the same time. But Dungeons and Dragons can be an amazing ministry. Seriously. Christian Gamers Guild is another one that focuses mostly on tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons. They have a whole bunch of resources on their websites about how to do this with non-Christians. Then a couple of resources about the interpretation of popular culture. Christ and Pop Culture is an online magazine. I wrote a couple pieces of them way back. Good think pieces about whatever's trending in popular culture at the moment. Hollywood Jesus is focused on movies and giving Christian interpretations of what's coming in Hollywood, what's everybody's talking about in the Hollywood Reporter and stuff like that. So, all of this, now that you know what you know, go out and love your geek and nerd students. And I think we have 3 minutes for conversation. Or I don't know when they're going to come and grab the mic from me or whatever. Well,
I mean, there's only 15 minutes between now and the General Assembly, so I guess.
Okay, so ask your questions really quick. Anybody have questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
Well, she has a question.
A friend of mine has this question.
We were wondering, because we know some of these animes and all
Yeah.
things have like dark themes.
Yeah.
Actually demonic themes. So we were wondering at what level we as Christians can watch it or learn about it without being like, I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, without... and I'm going to repeat the question just for the recording. If there's an anime that has really dark and even demonic themes, what level of... Where should Christians draw the line? And I'm going to tell you straight, I don't believe in lines for all Christians. I believe you need to know your own heart. You need to know the heart of your friend. You need to know where they're going to stumble. You need to know, and for yourself, and it's not just stumbling into sin, but there are some Christians who come from a dark background or are just really sensitive to that sort of stuff, and they need to not engage that stuff. If your friend's engaged in it, say, hey, can we watch another anime together, something that's a little lighter. The worst one that I know of is based on a video game. It's called Higurashi, or the English title is When Cicadas Cry. And it is my daughter was watching it when she was like 13, 14, and would not share it with us because she was like, she had some really dark years and she was just kind of drawn to the stuff. And we didn't figure that out until much later, and then we watched it and we're like, holy moly. It's about a village in which you have 4 friends, school-age children, and there's a festival being held by to the cotton god or something like that during the cotton harvest or something, and things happen and they end up murdering each other by the final episode, and then it goes back and their 4 friends and they're the same characters. They look the same, but they have slightly different identities. And then you run through the same story, and they always end up murdering each other. And then you go back and you do it again. So it's like murder, 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 murder. And I'm like, what is going on? And it's supposed to be a mystery game that you figure out something's going on with this festival that's causing kids to repeatedly murder each other in each different incarnation. But it's just I would not, like, that's a little dark for me. It was definitely too dark for my daughter at a formative time, and she was like deliberately hiding it. Now, I'm happy to say she got through that dark time, and God was really, really gracious to her. And I don't think it's necessarily wasted time, because she understands people who struggle with darkness better than I do, for sure. But I think those are things you just need to sort of think about and pray about and ask for wisdom with regard to that specific thing. I'm no, and not just for yourself, but other people who might be watching it with you. Am I going to make them stumble? But on the other hand, I don't say, it's not scriptural when a Christian says, this is something I struggle with, therefore no one else should watch this. This is something that's going to be tempting for everybody because it's tempting for me. That's a misuse of Christian liberty. So I know Christians like rules, and they like hard and fast rules. I think the rule is pray, know your own heart, and discern, and figure it out. And if you're in the middle of an anime series and it's getting dark, because they don't say, hey, we're going to be dark and whatever. But if it's starting to get into territory where you're just like, okay, I think I'm done. You're allowed to do that. Like Carolyn and I did that with Breaking Bad. Like, okay, I think we're done. But on the other hand, it was kind of like everybody was talking about Breaking Bad, and I wish I knew enough about the show that it was brilliant, but I really didn't like being vicariously linked to Walter White, because just as he got darker and darker. That's not.
For kids, it's much harder. They lack critical thinking. So
which is why.
Don't
Yep.
control them. That's not about liberty. It's about
No. Exactly. I'm so glad you said that, Irina. For those of you at home, Irina said, well, what about kids? And I'm like, this is why parents need to watch stuff with their kids. It is not enough. If you just say, no, you can't watch that, no, you can't watch that, no, you can't, and you forbid, then I can almost guarantee that when they leave the home, they will be about trying everything that you forbade at home. What you do instead is you say, yeah, not this for right now, maybe when you're older, but let's watch stuff together and talk about it, and talk about how to. I would much rather see parents. This is a whole other thing that I talk about, that I wrote about. There's a pop culture parent. Me and two other guys wrote a book about that. I would much rather see parents move into their children's world, love them incarnationally, and equip them with wisdom at age-appropriate levels for how to understand and how to process popular culture and the things that they're watching and the things that they're playing, without kind of being the moral judge. Sometimes you may have to step in and say, honey, I don't think this is good for you. And we need to wait on this until you're more mature. We did that with One Piece. I love One Piece. It's a shonen anime about a boy who wants to become the pirate king, and it's all about fighting and stuff like that. And the fights get really intense, and we said to my youngest daughter, this is not good for you at this age. When you're like 13, then you can handle it. And then we went back to the beginning and we watched it through with her as well as the other kids, because it's a great show. So I would say whenever you can, engagement instead of just prohibition. except where it's age inappropriate. Yeah.
Well, entertainment industry just floods us with games, with animes, and new projects. Like maybe 20 years ago there were not so many games. They were on the discs, and it was harder to get them. They improved. They become more realistic, but it had not always been like this.
Yeah.
Played games, just there are other options than this, and I don't think, me personally, I don't think that my children will lose something if they are not engaged in it.
I'll tell you what they lose.
I don't finish. Is there any other area of being fan of playing soccer, going out somewhere, like doing, I don't know, maybe some other activities rather being into imaginary world, like where they are kings and gods.
Okay, first of all, there's a lot to unpack there. What would your children lose? Your children lose the ability to interact with their friends on the basis of that shared game. They become the weird kids who don't do anything. They become the fundamentalist kids from the fundamentalist family who say no to culture. That's first of all. Second of all, imaginary worlds are not necessarily idolatrous. They are generally a mix of grace from God and idolatry. And teaching them how to discern the difference and how to navigate that is far more useful in the long run than just saying, no, honey, you're not going to do this ever. Christians shouldn't do this. I don't think that's what God calls us out into the world, and that world is cultural, and that world will contain all of these imaginary worlds. And if you just say, nope, I'm going to stay here where it's safe, you're kind of denying the call of Christ out into the world. Training your kids to do that makes them missionaries. And thirdly, can soccer become an idol? Yeah. Can nature become an idol? Germans know this. Czechs know this. Right? It's not, there's no safe place as long as the human heart is sinful. There is no safe place. Homeschool communities in the United States can become super toxic and places of sexual abuse. Like, there is no safe place as long as the human heart is fallen. What is much better is to teach kids that popular culture cannot make you lose your salvation. If you mess up, you go to the cross. You find forgiveness there, and you learn wisdom about what you can handle and what you can't handle. And secondly, you say, listen, if we're going to be in a relationship where I'm shepherding you, you have to be honest with me about what you're watching, what you're playing, who you're listening to, and let me join you. Let me come along with that journey because I love you and I want to know what your world is like.
I don't have to become a part of subculture in order to be a light and soul to the subculture,
It's really hard to keep a subculture at arm's length and say, but I really love you, because people are so invested. That's the point. If you say, nah, I'm not going to have anything to do with you because I think you're into something that's demonic, and therefore I'm not going to touch this because it might pollute me, then you're a pollutant and I can't deal with you. Like, there's that ownership, that identity forming thing. You have to involve yourself unless it's going to cause you to stumble, in which case you say, I'm just the weaker brother, Romans 14, and I can't deal with this, which is fine. Not everybody is called to deal with everything. But where you can, I would say, where you can, if we are to be cultural missionaries to our own culture, we need to be good missiologists. We need to be able to say, this is the target culture I'm trying to reach, and therefore I need to know the cultural stuff going on in this space if I'm going to communicate in a way that's relevant. That's just good missions practice. So I would say build bridges, not walls.
Yeah. Good.
That's Abigail. Did you have your hand up?
I was just going to say, my parents were strict lines,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't make me think, I didn't then rebel and think, okay, I'm going to watch all these things, I'm not going to watch. Because it was very clear to me why they said no to these things. And I think it's a case of being, you were saying, you have to be, Jesus said you are in the world, but we're not of the world.
Sure.
And also, Paul writes, have nothing to do with the things of darkness. And he lists so many things, like malicious things, murder, hate, and things have nothing to do with that. And I think often these things do have things to do with that. And it's a case of keeping ourselves pure, of being pure. And that's what we want to become more like Jesus. And I think, Jesus, he saw the beggars, he saw the adulteress, but he didn't become an adulteress to preach to him or to her.
Yeah.
He had to be on that level.
But is it possible for somebody to be in the world and to engage culture and not to become polluted? And I think it is. You just mentioned Jesus hung out with prostitutes. Didn't mean he polluted himself. Jesus says in John 14, I have called them out into the world. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Purify them. Your word is truth. We need to keep grounded in the word, for sure. But we need also not fear that we're going to be terminally polluted by seeing the wrong thing. If you want to go onto their ground, if you want to be incarnational, then you have to be. The conversations that you were not able to have with your friends, you don't know about. Like I don't want to say your parents did everything wrong, but I do want to say that if we want to raise children, including your students, as cultural missionaries, then you need to equip them to do so. If you want to reach students who are alienated from Christ, then you need to be able to go into these spaces without polluting yourself, which is a matter of the heart, which is a matter of knowing your own heart, and being able to connect with them and talk about things with relevance about what they're watching, why it resonates with them. So we may have a disagreement here. I would say whenever you can, try to engage and equip rather than withdraw, rather than withdraw into safe spaces. Christianity is not about keeping it to a safe space. Yeah.
I think for me, like the conversations arose because I didn't, and then I could explain why I didn't. So not necessarily, it didn't bother me that I couldn't talk to them about their games and things. It's more like, hey, that's weird, why don't you? And then I could explain why. So I think my parents equipped me to tell why I don't do that.
Sure. I just have a concern about constructing an image of holiness that is built from what we don't do. I think Jesus' understanding of holiness was about going into spaces, loving people. Jesus didn't catch leprosy. Jesus didn't catch adultery. That was the Pharisaical model, right? The Pharisees, Mark 7, the Pharisees come out of the marketplace and the first thing they do is wash. Why do they? And they wash their dishes and they wash their hands. And Jesus' disciples didn't, and the Pharisees started getting on the disciples' case for that. And why did they do that? They did not have germ theory. They weren't doing it out of hygiene. They were doing it because in the marketplace, I might have bumped up against somebody who was a sinner, and I need to wash that sin off of me and keep that pollution away from me. And Jesus said, it is not what goes into the body. You're not going to take in sin by eating, a cupcake that has sin germs on it or whatever. Rather, it is what comes out of a man. Like you eat something and it passes through the body and that's that. But what is that really makes you clean? It's what comes from within. And you can deny yourself as many cultural things as you wish. You still got to deal with the heart. That's not going to keep you pure. What keeps you pure is a heart that is surrendered to God, a heart that is living by faith and repentance, a heart that recognizes its sin and goes to the cross and says, Jesus, I messed up. Would you please, and that sort of progressive thing. And it's messy. It really is. Yeah.
So Ted, I think that it's actually not opposites of what the two of you guys were saying.
Wow, y'all are still here?
Yeah.
Sorry.
2 minutes.
All right.
2 minutes.
Can I say, so I think that there's a difference in Christians raising kids, and then also there's kids that are involved in the world that don't have any experience with Christ. But that you can raise your children in a certain way, and you could disagree. Different Christian families disagree about how they raise their children. But there's a difference between that and also with us in the classroom and students that are engaged in these things and how to engage with students that are doing that.
Yeah.
So I think that some Christian families do choose to lead their children through this, not necessarily let them participate in everything.
Yeah.
Right? But I think that in both ways, Christian children can be raised very well, right? But also, the other thing is talking specifically to being able to engage with our students in our classroom that are already engaged in these, understanding that that a Christian school is a safe place to be able to engage in these conversations, but always leading them back to Christ.
Right. I just want porous Christian communities,
yeah.
and I want us to be culturally savvy, not culturally anorexic, because we don't.
So I think you can be culturally relevant and be able to engage with culture, but then also preserving, part of it where we're saying, okay, this part of culture I'm not going to engage in a full way, but
right.
I can still understand it and know about it without actually being a part of it, but also understanding what people are going through so that you can also share with them.
And I would say, and that is a function of individual discernment and being accountable to others who know you well.
Yes.
So, okay, we're done.